Greetings and welcome to the latest IMCCA Pandemic Webcast. My name is David Danto, your host. And this is an interesting, happy, but yet still sad show. As you guys know, the IMCCA has been doing our UC Week events in New York twice, and last year in Silicon Valley to get a couple hundred people together to talk about the UC and the collaboration industry. And clearly the pandemic has had a lot of events canceled, and our Silicon Valley one is a part of that as well. But we had been meaning to do it in the UK as well, in London specifically, 2 years ago, but then we had to stop because of all the Brexit craziness. And then we were going to do it this year again, but obviously we can't because of the pandemic. So I wanted to do a substitute for that. I have a number of my guests. I'm the only non-Brit on the show today, at least not living in that area. Technically I'm still British because I still order my flakes and eat them here, and nobody else in the States understands what that is. So I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves. Prachi, let me start with you. Just give everybody your name and what you do in the industry for a minute or so, and then we'll move to everybody else.
Great. My name is Prachi Nema, and I work as a senior analyst within the Unified Communications and Collaboration teams at Omdia.
Terrific, Prachi. Thank you very much. Tom, how about yourself?
Hey, David. Yeah, thanks for having me. So Tom Arbuthnot, Principal Solutions Architect, Modality Systems, and we're a Microsoft Collab partner, so mostly Skype and Teams at bigger enterprises where I spend my time.
You are our Teams master that we have to bow down to and respect about all things.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do spend way too much time talking about and doing Teams, so that is my area, yes.
Okay, next is Danny. Can you say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Danny Rogers from AVI SPL. Been in the industry for more years than I care to remember. My responsibilities now within the organisation is I run our European and Asian EMEA global accounts program, and I've recently stepped up to that role from running our global channels organisation. I am based in the UK, but have a wide global variation and viewpoint on most things.
Okay, terrific. And as a special treat for this one, I have a co-host, my colleague Neil Fluester. Neil, why don't you introduce yourself?
I think you're going to say last, but by no means least. But yeah, I'm Neil Fluester. I'm a product director here at Poly. I was with Polycom before the coming together of Polycom and Plantronics to form Poly. So I've been in the industry for a long, long time here in the UK. But I cover Europe, Middle East, and Africa as a product director at Poly, and the product I look after is the region. So again, I can help you co-host this and also bring a view of what we always shout about that we need here in EMEA.
Thank you very much, Neil. I didn't say that because you probably are least, but that's not really important. So let me start this with a story, and this is a true story. I've had and I don't want to exaggerate here, I've had a 4-decade career in UC and collaboration and AV and doing things, and I've been privileged to work on a number of projects in the UK, in EMEA, and around the world, but specifically in London. And I know there are cultural differences. It's more than the difference between an elevator and a lift and the check and the bill and the rest of it. When I have a meeting, a project meeting in the US, I'll sit down with everybody on the team and say, this is where I think we're going, and everybody will tell me I'm an idiot. This is wrong. That's not going to work. I think this is going to work. It becomes this personality fest. When I've had those very same project meetings with my colleagues and teams that are generally UK based, they will sit down around the table and nod and smile and say nothing to me, as if everything that I'm saying is absolutely correct. Then later on in the day, when we all go out to the pub, that's when they'll tell me I'm an idiot and the project will never work. So I know that there are cultural changes and there are different ways of approaching and looking at things. And I'm curious if with the understanding that most of the unified communications industry, the manufacturers, the platforms, are located in the US and North America and Silicon Valley, are there cultural differences that are not being respected? Or things that could be handled better, generally in EMEA, but specifically in the UK. Anybody want to take that one first?
Yeah, I could jump in there. So yeah, I work on international projects too, and I completely agree. There's definitely a cultural difference. It's interesting we're going US, like kind of US and UK, because I think even state to state you see differences. So Silicon Valley and New York, very different for projects. So I think I agree. There's cultural differences in lots of different places, not US, UK. The tools, trying to get the tools to deal with that is an interesting question. Like, could the tools help or not is one question. I think what's undoubted is whoever's using the tools, like for example, a project manager or a team leader, I think they need to respect that not everybody might jump on video and say their mind, or not everybody might like collaborative work out loud chat and say their mind. So whatever tools you're using, you've got to coax opinions out and respect the cultural differences, I think.
Yeah, Tom, that's interesting. If I'm sitting in a room, in Canary Wharf, this is, 10 years ago, and I can't get people to speak up at the meeting in person, it must be difficult to get them to use Teams to start an instant message or a chat and tell me that there's some sort of problem. You're gonna have to be dentist to kind of pull that information out of them.
Chat is the hardest thing. Like collaborative chat, it's relatively easy, we found, to get people to use meetings and online, particularly in COVID. Like, what else choice have you got? Pushing people to video is a little bit of a push, but they'll get there. But getting people to type out loud in a collaborative space with their peers and their boss and their boss's boss, that's culturally quite hard. It's like, well, I'm not allowed to talk about my opinion until my boss's boss has approved it in some orgs. So that's the thing we found is the hardest, is getting people to say it's a safe space to collaborate. You can share your opinion. And again, that's not the tool, that's the culture kind of influencing how the tool's used, I think.
Yeah, and Danny,
you think just on that point, David, do you think some of that is not just cultural, maybe generational? When you look at the age groups that are used to collaborating in that way, and I look at it through the pandemic, the amount of people that still join a call but don't turn their video on. I find that I almost can't take the call seriously until I visibly see someone, even if it's on video. But the generation that are absolutely used to typing and talking and video at the same time, and similarly, it's when you have a company town hall, when that initial question comes and someone says, okay, we open for questions now, and you get that absolute deadly silence until you get momentum going. I just think that, if that was a group of 25-year-olds, they'd be typing like mad. If it was a group of 45-year-olds, they'd all be a little bit reluctant to actually have that. So I do think it's cultural, but I do think it's part generational as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, go ahead, David.
No, I was going. Please, I was going to call on you. So
Yeah. So I think that there are cultural differences, but the things like most of the vendors and service providers, they are based in North America, so they have been able to target their home market effectively. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why North America enjoys, a lead in UC adoption. So just to give you an example, we track collaborative meeting services on a biannual basis at Omdia, and in 2019 we estimated around 3 billion in revenue from collaborative meeting services, and of that 71% was generated in North America, and in contrast, only 17% came from the MEA region. So there is an issue in terms of adoption, and like Tom mentioned, there are issues in terms of turning on the video, or whether typing out using chat as a tool. So the bias as such is not in the UC tool as such, but it is more in terms of in people's perception and adopting these tools to carry out their work.
Got it. Okay. Does the time shift mean anything to you guys? I mean, the idea that you're operating 4 or 5 hours before your colleagues in the Northeast in the U.S. are up, and even more than that before your West Coast colleagues are up. Does the timing have anything to do with how difficult it might be for there to be an understanding of the culture and the tools and in collaboration globally?
I would have said pre-pandemic, maybe yes, but I think in this day and age where wherever you are, I mean, at 2:30 this morning, I was on a call to Asia. And there was some IM going on in the middle of that call, but then you're dealing with people that are used to dealing with technology. And I think one of the questions that was going to be discussed today, and I feel is important, is do companies have a North American bias? And I think if we'd had this conversation 2, 3, 4 years ago, we'd absolutely say yes. But I think the organisations, when you look at the size of the organisations that are represented here today, then everyone understands that the global economy now is just that. It's a global economy. So we at AVI SPL run a very, very proficient and successful global account program with companies that are in every single territory around the world. So therefore, our mindset, our attitude, our appliance, our dedication to those has to be global. So everything in our narrative is really based around the global premise and the global understanding. And I think customers expect that now as de facto standard, as well as staff expect that as a de facto standard. And back to the pre-pandemic usage of technology, I think it's obviously been proven all those roles that we said you couldn't actually use remotely, well, forget that now. It's been absolutely proven, whether you're in HR, whether you're in finance, whether you're in operations, other than distribution, you can do almost every role remotely. But people are having to catch up and learn those skills really, really quickly about that whole consumption and utilization of those technologies by working remotely. And that's where the big learning curve has been, in my view.
Well, I've said on a number. Go ahead, Tom.
Sorry, David. I was going to say, off the back of what Danny was saying there, isn't it interesting? I think I agree. The pandemic has proven working remotely for all types of roles can work. If you look at the bigger collab providers, from what I see, I don't have a pulse on all of them necessarily, the hiring for product, like engineering, product management, is all based in the place they're based. So yes, they have global marketing, they have global sales, obviously, but when you look at the people who influence the product, it does seem to still be you have to be in or around the HQ. So even the teams building the tools that we use as distributed workforces don't seem to be completely working in that way. And I think that influences the product development a little bit.
It's fair to say I am the only product manager in Poly in EMEA, and certainly in the UK. We did have an operation in Israel for a while, but now everything is in North America. So I think it's fair to say, yeah, engineering and product management does tend to be slanted into those North American communities from certainly the larger organisations.
Yeah, like I guess it's just that classic like slight bias of like, well, we're all working in the same time zone, it's easier, that kind of stuff. But you're what Prachi mentioned earlier about the cultural shift, like if you don't have people representing those things in your project engineering, first party product marketing, like that kind of thing, that bias is definitely going to slip in.
Well, when you become useful and good at working remotely, and you start to live the culture shift that we're just starting to see now, and again, I've been doing this for years. So I'm in my second decade of remote working, and people are just starting to play with it now. We're going to be changing from a place to purpose modality in terms of working. It's not going to be how many hours I've put in somewhere. It's going to be what my output is, what I've accomplished. And if I've accomplished it, my employer generally isn't going to care if I've done it at 2 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon or whenever. So again, since I've been living this for a long time, I will often get up early or be up in the middle of the night to do a project with Asia or with my UK colleagues. And even though I leave my workspace here in the house, my desk, around 5 or 6 o'clock, my time, I still have colleagues working, on the west coast of the US, and I'll still engage with them from a different, part of my house, just with my mobile phone. I think we're going to see less care on the timing and more and where people are located, and more care on judging the output. The real question becomes, how collaboratively is your project? Do you need to be working on it with your colleagues, and where are they, versus can you work on it independently and then report back to your colleagues?
Yeah, so I would like to speak from my experience here at Omdia. So we are like a global company. Many of my teammates and the analysts that I work with, they are based in all over the world, and we hardly find time difference as an issue, because we use these collaborative, the tools that facilitate collaboration. So I think the benefit of tools like Slack and Microsoft is the way they facilitate these asynchronous connections and workflows, so that teams in different locations and time zones can keep up to date and they do not miss on anything. So yeah, I think
what I'd maybe add to that, David, is a key point, and it's a bit of a clutch phrase, but work is a thing we do and not necessarily a place we go to now. So therefore, when you look at that, and this isn't generational, it's just the way it is that ability to have that output against the time frame that you're invariably working in. But I do find that the working day, ironically, has got longer for some of us, and by trying to accommodate a wider bandwidth of the globalization, that's just a fact and a way of the world. But I also think there's a key element to this, and that is about the way that people are using and consuming tools now, and the planning for new buildings, the planning for new the features from AV migrating into IT. It's this whole concept about the user experience versus the user interface. You know, we spent years and years saying we've got to have an X room and it's got to have these features and this panel and everything else. Now the conducive nature is really thinking about how do I use and consume technology. And with the whole premise of this conversation today is about UK or European bias, to get back to the message. And I don't really believe it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's about that whole concept now. How do I use and consume the tools? How do I interact with my building? How do I interact with my co-workers when I'm working remotely? How do I collaborate? How do I use my time? That's really now a feature of the functionality of the tools that are provided by many of the manufacturers we've highlighted today. You know, whether it be Cisco, whether it be Poly, indeed, you know, Teams, which tends to be a standard, whether it be Blue Jeans, whether it be Pexip, all fantastic collaboration tools. But what is my consumption and utilization and my interaction with those tools to make me more productive in my organization, that I can justify that to my business, that is qualitative and quantitative, justifiable, and then ultimately has an outcome, whether that be a dollar sign or whether that be productivity. That is kind of where we're looking at, and I think that transcends all nationalities, all borders, all cultural bias, because that's the way of the working world as we're migrating towards a global collaboration piece. So user interface superseded by user experience.
So let me summarize what I'm hearing from you guys, and I do want to let my colleague Neil ask a question or two in over here. But it sounds like any of the cultural differences, or many of the cultural differences that I experienced going back and forth over the pond to my colleagues in the UK, it seems that this pandemic, which has forced us all into this remote working modality, have sort of removed them because we're all having the same working experience. We're all connecting as we need to and not connecting as we need to, and we're home, and that has mitigated many of the differences that we would have, experienced in in-person meetings and working with our colleagues. Clearly, dress code is not an issue anymore. Time of day is not an issue anymore because we're all working when we need to and not when we don't to. It kind of seems like a lot of these issues have been resolved.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting. Oh, sorry, perhaps you go ahead.
I think the need for effective UC tools that enhance productivity is universal, and that is what has come out of COVID. It's beyond any limited to. It's not limited to any particular country or any particular team or an organization. Everybody universally would like solutions that can enhance productivity, help employees deliver more. Be without sort of hindering on or having specific requirements of being in one physical location.
Tom, you have
I think two things that stood out for me from what Danny said earlier as well. So one is, I think being remote was second tier in a lot of scenarios. So you'd have 5-10 people in the meeting, and then you'd have a couple of people remote, and you'd have that kind of after the meeting, coffee break, pub problem that you talked about at the start of the session, David. So I don't think that was US, Europe particularly, but there was definitely a thing of if you were remote, the meeting would go on mute for coffees and they carry on talking and you'd be out of the loop. That's gone when everybody's remote, which is fantastic. The other thing that's interesting is we talk about now kind of UC and Collab, or Collab and UC as one big thing. Something collaboration is doing is bringing things like task lists into the collaborative space and trying to help with that, what you talked about, measurement of productivity. So it's not just all jumping on a video call and that's what you see. It's actually we're workflow managing through this Collab tool, we're ticking tasks off, we're seeing we're getting things done as a team. So I think both of those have come to the fore, because you can't, when everybody's remote, you can't manage people by scanning around the office and seeing who's about. You have to have some kind of measurement of productivity that's not just they were in the office.
Yeah, it's no longer going to be a case that a number of my British colleagues used to tell me about, that people would come in at 6 in the morning and put their sweater on the back of their chair and then, go out at the club or play tennis and come back later in the day. But their boss saw that they were there. It's all that mattered.
Yeah, that kills me so much. There was a lot of that in London around like being first in and last out as well, and that kind of culture. And you look at Asia.
Yeah, whose car was in the car park first?
Exactly. I mean, they're sitting there playing solitaire for 7 hours, but they're in the office. Like, I love outcome-based kind of measurements. But yeah, I think that's going to be something that sticks around now. Is there's no longer that you were in the office, therefore you were productive. That's not a good measurement of productivity.
And we
Do
will
you
need.
think also maybe it's a responsibility of the organisations when they adopt a technology to make sure, or they choose a technology to make sure the adoption and utilisation is proliferated right across the business? The example, I come back to Teams again. Clearly I'm an advocate in favour of something like Teams. It's not just the IM, it's not just the video, it's not the collaboration. It's also the ability where you go and stand up a team within Teams, even if it's a short-term project that you stand up for 1 month, 2 months, whatever it may be. You share all your files. That is in a centralized place. You're able to, if I'm sitting here at midnight or at 6 o'clock in the morning, I want to go and update a project piece or a sales piece, I go and do that. Everyone gets notified there's been a change and they go view that at midnight themselves or at 6 o'clock in the morning. That, in terms of speeding up, as opposed to I'm going to copy a file, I'm going to put it in an email, I'm going to send it to everyone, they may or may not read, as opposed to a notification, Danny Rogers has made a change to this folder and this file. That, in terms of collaboration tools, speeding up and the flexibility to work any one of the 24 hours a day on that sort of thing, I think is really important. And I think that people will see that right-hand column of improved productivity, saving time, better collaboration, and then better outcomes as a consequence of that.
Prachi, did you have a point?
No, absolutely. I think what Danny mentioned, right? Having that persistent space, which, if you finish work at 5 p.m. in the evening and then you return to the same space next day, you haven't missed anything what your colleagues in other geographies were discussing. So that persistence of that channel or a space where all the collaboration is taking place makes a huge difference to your work quality and to your productivity.
Terrific. All right, so Neil, you and I were talking before the show started about whether or not there were some unique or specific use cases, generally in the UK, but also in the rest of EMEA, that a North American biased company isn't necessarily taking it seriously. Do you want to explore that a little bit and ask any questions?
Yeah, so just from the challenges I hear, I mean, the UK, although we have proper Queen's British English, obviously you have US English, and you kind of joked about that earlier. Clearly, you can't spell colour correctly over there, but we've had some interesting ones just in the UK, around Welsh, our products with Welsh capabilities. But then when you open that up into the wider Europe, Middle East, and Africa, if you have North American design products that don't understand the whole, the different character sets, Cyrillic for Russian or Arabic going from right to left versus left to right, and then all of the other characters. Companies having to develop that, and which are your tier 1 countries, which are your tier 2 countries, and which are the countries that kind of just have to put up with English and we ignore their language. I mean, that's from a product development standpoint, again, coming out of North America, it's hard for someone in a darkened room to kind of understand those kind of nuances. Clearly with software, it's a lot easier, but from a hardware point of view, when you're designing something like a remote control with physical buttons, you need 10 or 100 or, however many different physical devices around that. So I think language is a huge challenge for global product development. And again, where we want to kind of expand on that, and if anyone's got any sort of feedback around that.
Yeah, I think we see it definitely like you get US English, and then it's like, well, that's close enough to UK English, so we're not going to develop for the UK English because you're close enough. And in some ways, I'm like, well, we're quite blessed to at least speak the same language, so we inherit all the first-party documentation and everything for free, with the wrong spellings, of course, but we can deal with that. But yeah, I think your point is valid, and certainly when you look to, it's horrible to say tiering, but you're right, like tiering of countries in terms of commercial importance.
Yeah.
Like if you're not up there on the commercial importance, then you're going to be forced into English. And I know most multinationals run IT as an org in English, like that. It's English is the language because it crosses most boundaries, and frankly, most products run in US English, which is close enough.
I think the other things around accessibility, I think we have some quite specific laws in the UK around things like accessibility for visually impaired, hearing impaired, that might not necessarily be that exposed to a North American development market as well. So just creating products that again have those capabilities that meet the requirements of the UK around equal opportunities.
Yeah, I remember one of the first builds that I did in the UK. Danny, you could probably comment on this. I had probably designed 1,000 conference rooms and conference facilities, and one of my first builds in the UK was, well, do the systems connect into the fire alarm system? Like, why would I want this? Why would I want the room system to connect into the fire alarm system? It's because the UK at the time, and probably still, has requirements that when the building's fire alarms or any other type of warning system goes off, that it takes over all the video, all the systems, all the room alerts, and everybody gets alerted the same way. So I'm not sure if the software or the hardware that's being developed is compatible that way all the time. Have you experienced that, Danny?
Yeah, I have. It's a good point. As a global integrator of some renown, we're somewhat vendor agnostic, and the projects that we do around the world are, really taking the best of breed. But that is still a really relevant piece. You look at the integration now between facilities management for, track and trace, the facilities management to build and migrate into integrated workplace management systems, all the way from air to alarms to management of the building. That is really relevant, and that piece about to be all-inclusive for visually impaired or hard of hearing individuals is really, really key. That's still a duty of care of anybody putting those systems in to make sure that they are applied and they are adjoined as a consequence of that. Furthermore, the whole piece, when you look at the migration to smart and intelligent buildings, for instance, is that ability to track and trace every individual within that building, whether it's via sensors, whether it's via your network, and think from a security aspect. God forbid there is a fire in a building. In those old days of standing in the car park or in the parking lot with a clipboard and trying to register who checked in today and who checked out today. Now with the ability to see at any given time who was on a certain floor, who's exited that building, is really just a small piece of where technology is driving that. So yeah, I've done projects 25 years ago where, it really was, to your point, David, but now migrating to a modern day world of that capability. Who knows? We may never get back to full building consumption. It may be 5 years, it may be 10 years. We may never get back to that level. But surely you've got to know how you manage that building, how you manage the people in it, how they consume that, and then that duty of care to every single individual that goes into your building, whether they're employees or visitors.
You mentioned track and trace as well there, Danny. Like, that immediately sparks in my head like control of data and data security, and that's another international one that tends to be tricky. Like the European regs, the UK deciding we don't want to be in the European Union because that's fun. Now, like the international regs and the US regs are all very different about who can hold the data, who can use the data, who can transmit the data. So that's another one where we tend to see the North American rules get coded for first, and then we think about Europe, and then we think about other countries.
Well, I've been on a number of calls recently where I won't mention any names, but in terms of North American colleagues that don't know what GDPR is. So when you actually look at, something as basic as that, so when you come back to that are there cultural differences? Something as simple as a European statutory requirement and law versus what was back in the day about safe harbor in the US, about data and protecting data and where that's stored and how you store it. That all comes back to the mobile phone operators, and then also things like Facebook in terms of how they store your data and where your data is and all those kind of things. So yeah, you bet your life there are still cultural differences when it comes to privacy rules and regulations.
And I've definitely had the situation talking to product people where I'm like, this is the financial law, this is how it works. They're like, is it really though? But yeah. No, it really it's the law. So no, it's not like we'll get away with it in version 3. It's like, yeah, it's a legal requirement.
Yeah, I would say probably that from a manufacturing standpoint, from a programming standpoint, and again, my bias is here in North America, that GDPR is taken very seriously. That the beginning of those regulations was a major cultural shift in how all products and services were. I probably got, during the time as you guys did as well, 20, 30 notices a day of somebody implementing a change I had to agree to in order for it to meet, with the GDPR requirements. But Danny, I get your point that even though the manufacturers took it seriously, most of the people that you interact with here in North America have no idea what it is. I mean, in fact, a number of the companies that I've been with, the one I'm with now, Poly, and the last company that I work with is a consultant, I was required as a member of the company to take GDPR training and understand what the various requirements are. But I assume that that's probably odd that most of the people that you interact with from a technology and an integration standpoint, and certainly the general user population here in the US, has no clue what it is or what the requirements are.
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. Things are breaking down those barriers and things are moving forward, particularly when most of us here work in a global capacity, even though we're based in the United Kingdom. Therefore, understanding where those global accounts now, you have to be cognizant of those legal expectations, because that's first base. If you don't get past that, then you really are struggling. So I think that's key, particularly in those global deployment opportunities.
And California also led a little bit of the way this year with the regulations they passed around password protection, that every device that comes in, every IoT device, every industry device needs to have a unique password that you have to change upon first use. I know that's changed a lot of the Poly equipment that I use because I've had to deal with all those passwords. So, when you get a GDPR, when you get a regulation like that from an entity as big as California, all manufacturers generally that are going to be compliant have to jump along with it. So it's
I think that's one of the things that's nice about the whole SaaS situation, or like larger vendors. Like it generally, they're going to code to the requirements, and therefore everybody inherits the benefit. So like you say, GDPR, companies that anybody that traded within Europe had to apply to it. So basically, most big multinationals just said, actually, we'll just adopt the policy worldwide because it's easier than working out what's European and what's not. The California laws, like you say, all products are going to be coded to those, so everybody gets the benefit, which is nice.
How have you guys dealt with supply chain issues in the UK? I'm talking about from a consumer goods standpoint. I mean, we, here in the US, as the pandemic came out, and things got a little bit stretched, not a lot of people in the office, more people at home. Obviously, we had issues in all things with paper products, that there weren't as many manufactured for home use. So that we've been working on that, some of the products. Has supply chain been an issue in the UK as this pandemic has moved forward?
Yeah, I think so. We've had our fair share of issues in terms of so if you look at webcams or any the gear or the devices that you need for remote working, most of these were they were not available. So or there was you have to pre-order and wait for a month or 5 weeks, 8 weeks of wait time. So these issues have sort of surfaced a lot in terms of, and I've tried to order myself a webcam, which I can't get hold of as of now. Say, a lot of vendors have had issues to keep pace with the demand that rapidly went up.
Sure, and Prachi, at least you've got a really good pair of headsets that you're using there, so we certainly do appreciate that. Go ahead, Danny.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with Prachi there. The overall demand, no one could have predicted the not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands into millions of requirements for these. And it's not just so much the availability. What I have also noticed, whether it's by design or by default, and no one's to question, is how some of the prices have sneaked up a little bit as well as a consequence of supply and demand. I'm not suggesting there is a material gain from pandemic, but clearly, whether they're being shipped or whether they're being flown in for availability, pricing has gone up as a consequence of that as well. But for someone that's put together a global package, we worked on a what we call a COVID-19 starter kit for corporate real estate around the world to supply to all their tenants, to ship to their homes. It was almost like a UN delivery of aid in terms of shipping those packages around the world to home workers. So it was a fight to get hold of the bundle, the constituent bundle pieces to put those together. I have to say the likes of Poly and were quite fantastic in terms of availability, but some others maybe struggled with some of that too.
I was going to pick up on that. So, are many companies out there putting together those packs for their users and actually sending them out, or are they kind of going to the user saying, "Hey, here's $50 or $100, go and source your own"? I mean, what are you seeing around that? I'm just curious.
It's interesting dynamic. Great question, Neil. We within a matter of days were speaking to our global customers, asking, when you look at the banks, for instance, they had tens of thousands of people deployed at home. Right, all they've got is a laptop. What is the bundle package we need to get to those individuals? And we systematically, through our warehousing, actually put these packages together, agreed them in a matter of days, completed them in a box, and not only sent the box to those individuals, but also with set up user instructions, duty of care, how you sit at home, how high the screen should be. So a number of organisations, this was a lifeline to many of them because they hadn't planned for that processing whatsoever. And we're still doing those today, funnily enough, in a lot fewer numbers. But what is interesting is the amount of times we are asked by organisations, could you put together a webinar to tell people and show them how to use what you've sent them? One would think like plugging in a USB Poly or Logi camera would be somewhat straightforward, but even the disciplines of video conferencing, the discipline of when you used to interrupt the IM piece. So we did a lot of that, the after sales care of those packages, and as I said, the next staging post was really a COVID-19 starter pack, really for enterprise, really based around the touchless office. All of that will become clear over the ensuing months when people take that gradual return to work. But that is the next staging post between the home worker and the return to base.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, there's the hardware, the software, but one of the biggest changes is the wetware. As you say, that cultural thing of, here's all the tools, but they're only going to be good if you know what to do with them, how to use them, and how to get the best and are trained in how to use that tool. And again, it's like, as we said earlier, turning the camera on, is one big thing to start with. And again, using the actual Teams chats to bring people together, that cultural dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's all very well and good when you're people like David and ourselves that have used this for many, many years, and this becomes a second nature thing. But if you are in HR or operations or finance, and you haven't been, I've even seen them on production floors now, video, so you can actually see production and everything else, warehousing. These are areas that the home worker has never really been engaged from a video perspective. And we just take it and assume and take it for granted. The one thing I would say, the proliferation of social media and social media applications, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's FaceTime, whether it's Facebook, whatever it may be, means that so many more people use video, and it makes it so much more intuitive for people, would be my assessment.
Yeah, Prachi, you were going to chime in there, sorry.
Yeah, no. So I was saying, it's interesting to know that there are organizations who have gone that far in terms of putting the bundles together and helping users adopt these solutions or kickstart, their use of these solutions. But then there are others who have done nothing, And then there are others still, other organizations have given, like, they've handed out, say, to $500 or $1,000 to their employees and say, go and buy whatever you want to
Go on
buy
Amazon.
it'll make your life easy and stay productive. So there are different buckets where we can put organizations to their approach to how they've handled remote working.
Tom, you going to comment on that with regards to what you guys say?
Definitely. So same thing as Danny said. We saw lots of people scramble as soon as it happened, particularly pro services, financial. They're like, well, everybody's at home now. How do we deal with it? I think this pandemic, the C-level got a gimme for nobody saw this on the cards. Kind of it was a credible issue that 100% remote would happen. So they were given, okay, it's imperfect, supplies are tight, you're not going to do it. When this happens again, and then all the evidence is it will happen again, you won't have that. You'll be expected to have 100% remote, go with very short notice system. So I think things like these kits and the training and stuff, I think are here to stay, because if this happens again 2022, 2023, maybe sooner, there'll be no forgiveness at the C-level for what you weren't ready to go 100% remote, because this happened before and you should know it's going to happen again. So I think this time there's been a bit of a scramble. I think next time certainly bigger corps will expect to have a written strategy, have the kit ready, have the people ready, so it's not such a business impacting event.
Yeah, Tom, and it's more than just having it ready. A number of people would have their installations at home and they'd have their internet and they'd make a quick call for a minute and they'd say, yeah, I can connect, no problem, so I can do it. And they assumed they were ready, but they weren't prepared for when they and their spouse and their kids with education, distance education, and maybe some telehealth, with all these things, everybody hitting the flush button at the same time. Could we survive it in terms of the bandwidth that we had? And I think a lot of people discovered that just because it worked once doesn't mean it's a good business continuity plan.
Yeah, and there's a massive difference between working from home one day a week and working from home. Like, I think a lot of people had done working from home before for a day a week or something. Like you say, it was, I do a bit on my own, then I come back to the group.
It's the Friday, isn't it? It's the I'll work from home on Friday.
Yeah. You can't do Friday; it's too obvious, Neil. You got to do a Thursday or a Wednesday. But like, yeah, it's the I think that, like you say, David, like that. Are we ready holistically, culturally, systems, people, management, not just the tech? The tech's the minimum bar, and which most people didn't even hit the tech. But like you say, the whole piece, you have to be ready.
So you don't have to be. Oh, go ahead, Danny.
No, sorry, David. I was going to say that illustrates the weakest point of the chain, and that is we can control the technology, we control the users, everything else. But if your local line connection is the weakest part of the chain and you can't either get that bandwidth, or it's inconsistent, or you've got too many people using it, you can have all the best processes, best technology in the world, it falls down at that point. That's a very key area that I don't hear enough of in terms of disaster recovery planning for potentially phase 2 or whatever it may come, or anything else that may come in the future. We have to be cognizant of that. And I think that, you talk about cultural differences, and let's come back to the original point in question here of this session today. US government versus maybe UK government, where there's a massive investment in terms of, regional areas actually having broadband. I'm not talking about fiber, I'm not talking about superfast. Even areas that still don't have broadband in this country, in the United Kingdom. This is a really key element to being able to give everybody the same choices, equal level playing field when it comes to either distance working, distance learning, distance health. These are really compelling issues that we need to continue to lobby higher powers to make sure they're fulfilling, to have an equal society based around that. That's the only political speech I'll give today, but that's an element we have to consider as responsible adults and responsible members of society.
Yeah, I've said that many times, Danny, that that broadband access is better than it's ever been in the world, but it is also sadly still a privilege, and we need to make it a utility for everyone. So I certainly agree with that, and that's not just UK, that's both. Without speaking for my or Neil's employer, without revealing anything, you wouldn't have to be a rocket scientist or have a crystal ball to understand that manufacturers, platform providers are looking at this new future, this hybrid future with more people working remotely on a long-term basis, and realize that we've probably got people in shops and garages and R&D teams working on new solutions, whether they're products or services or platforms that are going to specifically address this in the very near future. So with that in mind, that we've got a number of industry people that are probably watching this, let me go around one at a time and ask everybody, you're speaking to the product managers in Silicon Valley that are designing the next generation service, product, platform. What's left out? What do you need specifically in the UK? What would your highest priority be to let them know this is on my wish list, and as you build for this next generation, here's the kind of stuff that we would need. So that's a tough one. Who would like to jump on that one first?
I can take it if nobody's got one ready. I think it's not particularly aimed at any vendor, but like simplicity and basics. I think we've seen when everybody scrambles, like getting the fundamentals right, making it easy to use, easy to understand, like having 1,000 options to cater for every use case is actually detrimental in a lot of ways for basic use. So I think like dwelling on the basics and getting them right, it doesn't excite Wall Street, but if you get the basics right, the end users have a good experience.
So I would add to that, David, those of us that have been around the video industry for a number of years will remember the classic phrase, whether you were at Polycom, whether you're at Cisco, whether you're at Hamburg, about interoperability. And that is the ability that if I'm on a Blue Jeans call, on a Pexip call, on a Skype for Business, well, a Teams call, I don't have to go and change all my settings depending on what I've been on previously. It just automatically works. I would echo, essentially what Thomas said there in terms of making sure that things are interoperable, seamless, that I don't have to think how I actually connect. I just go do it. And that's a real key element to this.
Prachi, anything from you on your wish list?
Yeah, so I think I've got two things that I would like to just mention here. One is that I think we talk a lot about productivity. We say all our conversations around collaboration are focused on how these tools can enhance productivity, but little thought is being put into how to make these tools more human. And I think if the platform, the vendors and the solution providers, if they take into consideration employee well-being and sort of nurture that aspect, that is something which is going to become essential as we keep working remotely, because the difference between the working life and our personal life is disappearing. And so how can these tools help us nurture our the human spirit and help in employee well-being? That is one thing. Then the other thing, I feel that the frontline workers often get excluded in these type of in devices. So and the solutions that vendors are bringing to the fore. So how can they make sure that frontline workers have the same sort of experience with a consistent UI across different devices? How can they be more productive? Because these are the people they continue to commute when most of the knowledge workers are working from home. These guys are going into work day in and day out during this COVID time, and I guess they a little bit of focus needs to be in the direction how they could be equipped with better tools.
Very good point. Neil, you want to address any of that before we close?
I don't necessarily address it. I guess from my point of view, and it echoes the point that Danny made earlier, is the kind of out-of-box experience. It's easy for us to say it's just a USB camera, you plug it in, and the magic happens. But there needs to be that simple next finish. I'm good and I'm done, because these products are not necessarily going to go out to the technical people. They're going to go out to the finance people, the HR people, the marketing people who might not be necessarily technically adept. there needs to be that kind of really simple out-of-box experience to get you up and running and give you a really great experience, so it's not left in the box or the camera isn't switched on because you don't know how to use it. So I think out-of-box is one thing to look at. Clearly, great audio and video is sort of table stakes these days, and clearly, I'm biased on on what we do, but we do a good job of it. But then also, again, can you do some innovations around blocking out that there's two 9-year-old boys downstairs at the moment going crazy, and hopefully you can't hear them. My window's open and there's trains going past, cars going past, and again, I don't want that interrupting the call or the can everyone go on mute please because someone's got a leaf blower going in the back garden or something. So those kind of audio innovations to make sure that if that person is choosing to work from home, that it's not going to disrupt and give the others a poor experience, and also to make them feel like a second-rate citizen in the fact that they're not in the office and they're not sitting around the same table, to try and give them the best experience that they possibly can. So that would be my points.
Great point, Neil. All right, so let me ask everybody how people can get in touch with them if they want to reach out and find out more about what you do and get more answers. So Prachi, let's start with you. Can you let everybody know what's the best way to reach you? Is it your email? Is it LinkedIn? How would you want somebody to reach out to your firm?
Yeah, so email, LinkedIn. Do you want me to share my email address or?
No, whatever you're comfortable with, or just share your company's website, however you'd want somebody to get more information about.
Yeah, so we are. You can reach out at prachi.nema@omdia.com, and we have a team of about 5 analysts within the workspace services, so we're happy to answer any calls or any questions that you might have. And we do a lot of things, right from scorecards to surveys to market trackers and research, custom work, syndicated work. So please do reach out in case you have any questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Prachi. Tom, how would somebody get more information from you?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, so tomtalks.blog is the blog for everything Microsoft Teams that I can keep on top of, and I'd say LinkedIn is pretty busy at the moment. So if you're in this space, lots of good debate going on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with people there.
Thank you very much, Tom. Danny, what about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, David. avispl.com is the place to go for all things integration, smart buildings, collaboration globally. For me, you'll find me at Danny Rogers on LinkedIn, and then danny.rogers at avispl.com, and happy to connect with any of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. So Neil, I hear a rumor that you may do some kind of show on the internet?
Yeah, you and me both. You are my great helper on my weekly news show that I do for Polly on YouTube. YouTube is kind of my thing, though I do try to dip into LinkedIn and Twitter a bit, but mostly enjoy the YouTube and creating content for people. I think visual content is far more compelling than statics and text. So if you just Google Neil Polly, you'll find me in Google. Find me on YouTube. Polly.com obviously is where we work, and David and I do a weekly news show, as I say, on YouTube. So do hook that up and subscribe if you're interested in anything around UC and AV. We tend to do some interesting stuff, get some great guests on. So join us every Monday at 3 p.m. on YouTube.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thanks to all of my guests. I think this has really been an interesting show, and what I didn't realize when we planned it is that it looks like working from home and the pandemic has really removed some of the cultural barriers that may have existed across the pond between the US and the UK. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's a great place for work to be. So for Neil, for everyone at the IMCCA, I'm David Danto. You guys know how to reach me. You can just Google me, and I'm all over the place, way too many places. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll keep doing these pandemic webcasts as much as you guys like them, and keep watching them. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you on the next one.